comments.
Thank you, Chair and Ranking Member Norton, for having us here today. Today's hearing on the State of the Highway Trust Fund is an opportunity to discuss a critical responsibility that faces this committee. How do we ensure a continued, shared, reliable, and robust funding package for surface transportation projects across the country in the future? States, local governments, tribes, and transit agencies rely on the certainty of funding from the HTF to plan and build road, bridge, and transit projects that support the economy, connect people to jobs, and provide safe transportation. Today's hearing is titled Running on Empty because revenues into the HTF have been insufficient to support bipartisan infrastructure priorities and investment levels set by Congress since 2001, as the Chair noted. As a result, Congress has transferred $275 billion from the general fund to the HTF since 2008 to maintain the system of federal support for state and local transportation projects, a system that's been in place since the 1950s. Revenues have not kept pace with investments because Congress last acted to raise the federal gas and diesel taxes, the main sources of revenue for the Highway Trust Fund, back in 1993, 30 years ago. If the federal fuel taxes were indexed, the current rate for gasoline would be over 37 cents per gallon, and diesel fuel would be at nearly 50 cents per gallon. So it's no surprise that we can see the purchasing power of this revenue has deteriorated for over 3 decades. So while the future of the trust fund needs thoughtful consideration, cutting investment in infrastructure is not an option. The bipartisan infrastructure law marks the largest investment in transportation infrastructure since the founding of the interstate highway system and the creation of the trust fund. And we cannot have a big league economy with little league infrastructure. That's why we enacted the BIL to respond to decades of underinvestment at the federal level. Just last week, the Federal Highway Administration announced over $60 billion for roads, bridges, and safety projects distributed by formula to states, so every state in the country sees a direct and demonstrable benefit from the fund. So I'd encourage all members to call your governors and tell them to get that money spent and jobs created in your districts. Even as the federal government operates under continuing resolution, however, dedicated revenues from the trust fund made that announcement possible. This kind of consistent investment should be the norm and not the exception. And thanks to the continuity of the trust fund, states, local governments, and tribal governments go into every construction season with the certainty needed to move ahead on planned projects without delay. In the coming decades, with anticipated increases of population and demand for freight transportation, sustained and predictable investment in our infrastructure and in safe mobility will only grow in importance. In the next surface transportation reauthorization, Congress will have to decide how to fund transportation investments and whether or not to adjust the sources and levels of revenue that go into the Highway Trust Fund. The bipartisan infrastructure law directed the Department of Transportation to establish a pilot program evaluating a national motor vehicle mile per mile user fee. The BIL also updates and continues a grant program for state-level user fee pilot programs. And just as a matter of history, in 2007 in one of these iterations of transportation legislation, we passed a bill that included the Transportation and Revenue Commission that came back and recommended a vehicle miles traveled fee. So that was 16 years ago by my math, and we're still treating this as a pilot program. So my home state of Washington has established a pilot program to test and analyze a road usage charge, or a RUC, for vehicles as an alternative to gas tax. I'm happy to have Rima Griffith, the Executive Director of the Washington State Transportation Commission, which runs the Washington State's RUC program, here to share some lessons learned with the committee. States across the country are taking action to increase revenue to fund transportation projects. 31 states have approved plans to increase revenue through additional bonds, fuel taxes, vehicle registration fees, and tolling. Additionally, at least 33 states assess annual EV fees ranging from $50 to $225. Although EVs are not the cause of the trust fund insolvency, but as they become more prevalent, we will need to decide how to incorporate them into a user-pay system. And the states continue to explore options to fund investment. We can learn from these efforts. So one more history lesson for me, I guess. Back in 2015, I observed that our country's transportation funding is running on empty. Without predictable federal transportation investments, we slam the brakes on creating jobs and growing our economy. 8 years later, I continue to appreciate the sentiment and the urgency with which we must continue to press for a long-term transportation funding solution, and that we carry that forward in today's hearing. So I really do thank the chair and the ranking member for getting this together and getting this started and thinking about this for the next go-around. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields.